Today we're going to look at how the United States moved into the modern era and how that era became shaped by conservatism, the end of the Cold War, and also globalization. So as we move through this very brief little introduction and overview, think about how did the US go from Cold War tension to becoming the world's dominant power, and what new challenges came with that. Also, as you're reading and you're doing the learning curves, think about that as well. So in 1980, this guy right here, Ronald Reagan, his election marked a major turning point in American politics. And Reagan believed that the government had become too large and just too involved in everyday matters of people. So his goal was to reduce the role of the government. And his economic plan, his domestic plan, became known as Reaganomics. And it focused on cutting taxes for the rich, reducing government spending, and deregulating businesses. And these policies, it did help stimulate some economic growth, but it also led to a growing gap between the rich and the poor. And at the same time, Reagan increased military spending and promoted very traditional Christian values, which were key goals of the New Right. And remember, we talked a little bit about the New Right and the rise of the New Right in chapter 27. So at the end of the Cold War, Reagan started with a very tough stance against the Soviet Union, calling it the evil empire. And this is like mid 80s that he's doing this. We're going to have the end of the Cold War, really happen 1989, 1990. But over time, things changed. This evil empire began to change. And that changed under the leadership of the Soviet Union's new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. When he came to power, he introduced reforms and he was ready to negotiate with the US to kind of ease this tension that had been building since 1945. And together, under the leadership of Gorbachev and Reagan, what they do is both sides reduce nuclear weapons and they improve diplomatic relations. So by 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed. Gorbachev is out of power at that point. We have the breakup of the Soviet Union. We have the dismantling of the Berlin Wall. And all those things combined will officially end the Cold War. And what this does is this kind of leaves a power vacuum for the United States to suck all that global power. And so the United States emerges in the early 1990s as the only global superpower. This has changed since 1990. There's a lot more at play here, but in 1990, especially 1991, that was kind of it. President George Bush helped manage this transition. He was Reagan's vice president. And this is Papa Bush. This is the first Bush that we had in office in the 90s. One major moment was the Gulf War, where the U.S. led an international coalition to push Iraq out of Kuwait. And you'll read about this war. You'll also read about Desert Storm and just how quickly this all happens. These are not long, prolonged wars. These are very on the ground, fast. These are bombing campaigns that happen really quickly, boots on the ground, really quickly movements and wars that are happening. And this showed that the US would now take a leading role in those global conflicts. At the same time, the world became more connected through globalization, economically and politically. And that's really what chapter 29 talks about, is this globalized world. So moving into the 1990s and the 2000s, the United States entered a new era shaped by technology and globalization. Technology changed everything. The computer revolution and the rise of the internet transformed daily life. So I don't know if you can see it here, but this was the original computer. Computers filled entire rooms. Like now, this is the computer. It's all like handheld. This has more computing power than the first space shuttle that launched the moon landing. And so with this revolution and the rise of the internet, people could now communicate instantly, access information easily, and participate in a global economy. And this changed how people work, learn, and how we connect. We also see a more diverse America. Immigration increased significantly, especially coming from the South. So from what we in the United States call Latin America, but really those people migrating from Central and South America into the US. And also we see an uptick in populations from Asia migrating to the US. So as a result, the United States became more diverse and ideas about identity and culture really continued to evolve. Then we have Bill Clinton. And during the years of Bill Clinton, we see huge economic growth. We see trade expanded through agreements like NAFTA and political division increasing. And at the same time, there are new global threats began to emerge, especially terrorism. And, the attacks on September 11th, that was a turning point. I want to make a keynote. This was not the first attempt at the World Trade Center. This is actually the second attempt. There were some earlier attempts in the 90s. There's also terrorism happening on military bases around the world and against U.S. embassies. But this was the big one. This is where it really hit home. And this was I don't want to say it, but a successful terror attack on U.S. soil. So in response, what we're going to do is the U.S., we invaded Afghanistan. We are later going to invade Iraq, and then we are also going to pass the Patriot Act, which is going to limit civil liberties for people. But that was to increase security. And these actions raise important questions about security versus our civil liberties and when those civil liberties are constricted. So your freedom of speech, those civil liberties that you have. And in recent years, we have some challenges that are happening. So in the years that followed 9/11, the U.S. faced several major challenges. We have the Great Recession, which that's going to come at the end of Baby Bush, George Bush Jr. At the end of his presidency, we have the Great Recession, and that's kind of Obama's going to come into office with this recession that's starting to take place, and it really damages the economy. We have political polarization increased, and issues like immigration, race, and inequality become even more visible. Especially look at those pictures from Katrina and the way that race was used to describe different victims of Katrina. But presidents like Obama and Trump, they approach these challenges in very different ways, reflecting very deep divisions within our country. So big picture, what connects all of this? Well, we see the rise of conservatism reshape politics, the rise of the new right. We see the end of the Cold War really changed global power, and globalization and technology transformed everyday life. But these changes, they brought new challenges: economic inequality, political division, and also global conflict. So as you move forward and you read over chapters 28, 29, think about this. Do the benefits of globalization and technological growth outweigh the challenges they create?